Well, I get a lot of inspiration from guys who come to my groups. And this week in one of the groups, we were discussing this idea of hope. And in particular, how we experience hope in the journey ahead of us in our recovery. And one of the things we realized together was that our expectations played a significant role in how we hold on to hope as we, together walk out of our embedded porn habits. And so today we want to explore this topic. When can I check this off on Finding Traction? Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, regarding life changes, we are now in December of 2023, and I know a number of guys have found that they struggle during the holidays, or as they look at the end of the year, they're asking themselves, do I need to make some sort of systemic changes in my life? And I want to encourage you, if you find that porn has become embedded in your life despite your best intentions, and despite some of the negative consequences that it is resulting in your life, I would really encourage you to reach out. I just ask you, guys, are they at the point of being sick and tired of being sick and tired? And I love to talk to guys. And if you really want to explore maybe some of the changes as you look forward to 2024 that you are hoping to make in your life, I really want to encourage you to reach out to me. My email is bandofbrothers.care, C-A-R-E, @gmail.com. And again, love to hear from guys, meeting with guys from all backgrounds, met with them from different parts of the world. We've had a great time in terms of getting together and hearing more about your story. So please reach out to me. So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of hope and how expectations play into it. As we were having this discussion, one of our guys made this great comment, and his comment was this: my hope varies on whether I see my recovery as a project or a process. And as the good group leader, I say, please tell me more. What do you mean? And about this idea of recovery as a project or a process, and how specifically does that affect the amount of hope that you hold on to in this journey? And the response the guy said to me was really good. He said, if I see my recovery as a project, it's kind of like painting a fence. If you've ever painted a fence, I know I have. You go get the paint, you go get the brushes, maybe you put on a coat of paint. Maybe your fence needs 2 coats of paint, but eventually you are done. Voila, painted fence. And you put your paint and brushes away. The project is now completed. However, if you see your recovery as a process, it's an ongoing path or journey that you are learning to walk as you move along. You're always learning and growing. So, with this idea, I started playing with this idea a little bit more, and I think he's onto something, and I think it's a really important concept. For example, if you see, your journey away from porn, and walking through and making the changes in your recovery, if you see it as a project, in one way, you're always constantly asking the question, are we there yet? But if you see it as a process, you're far more likely to ask the question, what am I learning and how am I growing? It's a much bigger question. It's not just, am I still looking at porn? It's a question of, what kind of man am I becoming? If it's a project, then, any slip or relapse, it feels like you're back at the start again. I guess in that way, it would be kind of like you painted the fence, and immediately after you painted the fence, a rainstorm comes along and washes all the paint off your fence. Not that we wouldn't know anything about rain here in the Northwest. My goodness. But, right? So that's kind of what happens in a project mentality when there's any slip, relapse, setback. It's like, oh, rainstorm came, washed all the paint away. But in a process perspective, even slips or relapses, what they are is they're opportunities to learn and to grow. As one of my guys who is a jiu-jitsu guy says, it's win or learn. You're always learning and growing. Here's another one. If you see your recovery as a project, then you're always tempted to end the steps, end the process, end your recovery as soon as you experience the first signs that you're experiencing any clean time. I mean, I've had guys that, they start going along, and the very first time they might maybe experience a month or two where maybe they've never experienced a month or two in terms of clean time or not returning to porn. And then they go, I'm good. And as if, 10, 20, 30 years of their embedded habits are simply going to go away. And they're really tempted to say, okay, I'm good. I think I've got this. Project done, fence painted, let's put all the paint and brushes away. But if you see it as a process, then what happens is you are far more likely to continue to do the very things that got you to the good place that you're experiencing. We all, know stories of, and people who struggle with mental health and need medication to regulate, their brain and, regulate, it's like brain vitamins. But oftentimes in some settings and in some mental illnesses, people are tempted to say, okay, I'm feeling better now. I don't need my medication. And you're going, no. The medication is what was necessary and is the reason why you feel like you're in a better place. So again, it really makes a difference whether you see this as a project or a process. With project thinking, you're always looking for a simple solution to fix the problem so that it's over and done with. But with process thinking, you are looking for principles to live by to navigate whatever challenges and vulnerabilities you have from a whole life of habitual living. You're also tempted to think of your struggle, let's say with porn, as simply one-dimensional if it's a project. But if it is a process, you're going, how does my porn use fit into many of the larger life issues that I need to learn to navigate? It's far more multi-dimensional. In project thinking, you really go, I can't rest until the project is done. I'm going, you know what? Once the project is done, then I will be in a better place, and then I can start coasting along. But the idea of process thinking is, you know what? It's never going to be completely done, but I can still learn to live and thrive despite the existence of these challenges. Right? One of them is going, okay, I'm going to be done. This is going to be out of my life. And the other person is going, no. This is always in one sense going to be a part of my makeup, but I can learn to live and thrive and manage this in a good and healthy way. Let me give you an example that one of my guys gave. And this was a guy that loved to work out. He even loved to do the, I guess there's a a super intense workout regimen called the P90X. You can tell how much I work out. Well, I go to the gym 3 times a week, but it's just not that intense, right? So the P90X, and he loved to do that. But due to one problem or another, he ended up having to deal with sciatic nerve pain. And it became, it was painful. It really laid him up. And as a result, he completely stopped working out. Now, hopefully I'm getting the story right. But, and so what happened is, for the next number of months, his whole focus was how to solve the problem of his ongoing sciatic nerve pain. And he stopped all physical exercise in hope, that, okay, I'm going to get back to my exercises once I've solved the problem of my, my back pain, the sciatic nerve pain. Well, the problem was the pain never went away. And it went on for months and months, and he wasn't working out. And because this gave him a lot of satisfaction, he was bummed out with the lack of exercise. And he was caught in this trap of trying to solve a problem that just wouldn't seem to go away. So he had very much a project idea or a project approach to his nerve pain. But then he describes he went to a physiotherapist who started to work with him and work around some of that nerve pain and actually give him some exercises that he could do that didn't exacerbate his sciatic nerve. So things like plans or push-ups or other things like that. And so he started to do that, despite the fact that, as my phone goes off, despite the fact that he still had some of this pain in his life. And then what happens, he found that, you know what? I can actually resume a chunk of my P90X regimen, not all of it, but a chunk of it, and it leaves me feeling better, more in control of my life, and it's a process. So he didn't just say, I'm going to wait until all of my, pain goes away before I start my exercises. He had switched his thinking from the idea of it being a project to being a process. Here's another example that I've used. I'm not a doctor, but I think I'm on the right track here. And I take the difference, for example, between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes, you can deal with more like a project, because if you get your weight under control and you watch your diet, you can usually get past many of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes. In one sense, you can move past it. It's a project. It can be solved in one sense. But type 1 diabetes is more caused by the inability of your body to produce its necessary insulin. I did look that up just to make sure I was on the right track here. But the bottom line is there is no simple solutions that you can do to take that problem away without managing it by external insulin. But here's the point. If you continue to take the process steps to properly manage your type 1 diabetes, you can not just manage, but you can learn to live and thrive as a diabetic. Right? The difference between seeing it as a project, something to check off, something to be finished, versus a process of ongoing maintenance and health. Here's a concept which I also think is similar. We've used this in the marriage courses me and my wife taught, and it's a concept from the marriage therapist, John Gottman. And he describes 2 types of marriage conflicts and challenges. The first type he describes as solvable. Solvable problems are usually external or circumstantial. And if a couple sits down with good problem-solving strategies, those kind of issues can be dealt with. They go away, the fence is painted, the project is done, The problem is solved. But then John Gottman describes a second type of problem, and he says this is actually more than half of the problems. He says this is actually something that he calls perpetual problems. They're more internal to the characteristics and personalities of each of the two partners. And many of these problems arise from the deep differences between two people. They don't go away. In fact, whoever you marry, you end up choosing a whole set of perpetual problems for 10, 20, 30, 50, or, like the Carters, 90, 90 years or something, right? Now, that can sound horribly depressing, and there's no quick solutions. You can say, well, if my spouse would just get her act together, or my husband would just get his act together and change and become more like me, then we wouldn't have this problem. But you know how well that works when you try to change your partner, right? But Gottman talks about, and his course teaches, if you, through the power of acceptance and teamwork, learn to recognize your perpetual difference, you can learn to manage those differences and not just survive, but actually thrive as a couple. The challenges remain, but you've learned to manage them. You're not solving them. In his languages, you're learning to resolve them. You see, that's getting back to that same idea of project versus process. So let's go back to this very first idea of how hope plays into these concepts. If the hope that you have in your porn recovery is based on a project concept, you will constantly be looking to, when am I going to get completely free and clear of this challenge, this thing in my life where struggle is no longer a part of my world. And that's going to be your sole focus. And every time something like, lust or arousal or a strong trigger or temptation revisits you, you will be tempted to think, I'm never going to get better. This will never go away. Every time you slip or edge, no matter how small or large, you will feel like you've made no progress whatsoever. But if you see your embedded porn history for what it is, and you begin to, with your recovery, reach out with humility and honesty to trusted people, you learn from your struggles and slips, you take your insulin. If you approach it in this way, you will actually find yourself in a much different and a much, much better place as true recovery becomes a way of life for you, a process. So here's to the process of recovery and freedom that we're learning to live in. So welcome to a better life. We'll see you next time.